In a culture that's intoxicated, we could say, with self-promotion, influence, image, and control, we're witnessing something a bit unusual, something far more dangerous than simple pride. Beneath the polished smiles, charismatic leadership, emotional manipulations that we see, and relentless admiration that is hidden behind the scenes from certain individuals, there's an admiration for lies that's, we might call, a hidden addiction. An addiction not to a substance, but an addiction that's more powerful, you might say, because it's masked. It's not something that's so visible. It's an addiction to power itself. What if narcissism is more than a personality issue? What if narcissists' hunger for control operates like a drug? Dependency within the brain is a result of that. What if that happens? Have you ever thought of it that way, that the brain becomes addicted to power? What if domination, intimidation, emotional manipulation, and the need to feel superior are actually chemically reinforced behaviors, producing a neurochemical high that keeps the individual trapped in that destructive cycle? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most misunderstood psychological and spiritual realities of our time, my opinion. Because the frightening truth is this: for many narcissists, power is not merely desired, it's craved. The applause becomes dopamine. Control becomes emotional anesthesia. Conflict becomes stimulation. Submission from others becomes psychological fuel. And like any addiction, the dose eventually has to increase. It's never enough. What begins as insecurity can evolve into emotional exploitation. What begins as woundedness can evolve into domination. What begins as self-protection can eventually consume marriages, families, churches, ministries, and leadership systems from the inside out. But this conversation goes even deeper, because the Bible warned us long before neuroscience ever discovered the brain's reward circuitry. Bible scripture speaks repeatedly about pride that cannot be satisfied, a heart that exalts itself, a soul starving for glory apart from God. The narcissistic struggle is not merely clinical, it's profoundly spiritual. It's the rise of what the Bible and counseling alike reveal as the false self, an identity built not on truth, not on humility, not on love or surrender, but on image, control, fear, and self-exaltation. And here's the tragic paradox. The narcissist often appears powerful externally, while remaining deeply fragile internally. The very behaviors that create temporary feelings of superiority simultaneously deepen emotional emptiness, relational destruction, and spiritual blindness. So today, we ask that difficult question that I guess you might be asking right now to yourself. And oftentimes we're afraid to think about it. Can someone become addicted to control? Why do narcissists escalate when challenged? Why does humility feel threatening to them? Why does accountability often provoke rage? And why do some individuals seem almost intoxicated by silence, fear, and emotional submission from others? This isn't simply a discussion about difficult people. This is a journey into the intersection of neuroscience, addiction, trauma, spiritual brokenness, and biblical truth. Because until we understand what is driving the narcissistic cycle beneath the surface, we will continue treating symptoms while ignoring the deeper bondage underneath. And perhaps most importantly, if narcissistic power is counterfeit strength, then what does authentic power actually look like? The answer may challenge everything our culture celebrates. Stay with me on this. I'm Dr. Pierre Samaan. It's great being back with you, and welcome to our series on Unmasking Narcissism, Pathways to Healing from the Mask of False Self and the Fragile Core Beneath the Facade. We're currently in part 2 of Unmasking Narcissism as an Addictive Behavior. If you're interested in the subject of addictions, let me encourage you to take a moment and think about my book on unmasking addictions. It's in the market, and it's available on Amazon and WestBow Press, and I'm sure you'll find it interesting for yourself, for family members, for those dealing with their own addictions, sort of covering all the bases of addictions and addiction recovery. Well, back to the subject, intoxicated by power. That's what happens with narcissists, isn't it? The neurochemical high of narcissistic control is our theme. Understanding narcissism beyond the personality disorder and into both a neurological addiction and a spiritual disorder rooted in that false self that we've been talking about all along. The Bible tells us pride goes before destruction and haughty or arrogant spirit before a fall. We can find that in Proverbs 16:18. That arrogant spirit eventually gets them into trouble because eventually they start believing their own lies to be true. And before you know it, it's, well, what did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. You know, and it's kind of a believing the lie to be true and the truth to be a lie. They see that, they believe it, they're thinking it constantly. Therefore, their arrogance begins to you might say deceive them as they progress along in gaining that intoxication of power. Narcissistic behavior is not simply arrogance or selfishness. In counseling relationships infected by narcissistic patterns, we often witness an alarming behavioral loop. The more power the narcissist gains, the more control they crave. But this isn't merely psychological. Narcissists experience power and control as a neurochemical high, similar to the intoxication of a drug. What's happening beneath the surface? Well, I think what's happening beneath the surface is something that goes on in everyday life, but it's accentuated to the point that the brain becomes addicted and causes addictive behavior as a result of it. What drives the compulsive domination, emotional manipulation, and inability to surrender control? The answer lies not only in personality theory, but also in the brain's reward system, the reward circuitry of the brain. Just as addicts chase the next hit, narcissists chase the next moment of dominance. Today we're going to discover more about the addictive behavior evidenced in narcissism. The brain's addiction is expected. Whether it's a drug or a behavior, the brain is going to get intoxicated. It's going to stimulate certain chemicals, the feel-good chemicals, and a lot of things are occurring, layers of things, or a cascade of things that are occurring. Narcissists become neurologically addicted to dominance and control. The eyes of man are never satisfied, as the Bible says. That's you and me. We're never satisfied, are we? We always want a little more of this or a little more of that. So that's true of all of us. It's especially accurate for the narcissistic individual, however. who often experiences emotional gratification when others obey, or they may admire, or they may fear, or even submit. That's intoxicating to the narcissist. In comparing this process to addiction, we can see that the brain rewards power with pleasurable neurochemical responses. Over time, the narcissist requires greater levels of control to maintain the same emotional high. This leads to manipulation, gaslighting, intimidation, and emotional exploitation. Power becomes emotionally intoxicating. Control temporarily numbs insecurity and shame. The narcissist increasingly depends on dominance for emotional regulation. So there's neurochemical reinforcing that occurs in the brain as a result of that behavior. Dopamine is reward and pleasure. Serotonin, status and superiority. Endorphins, emotional numbing. Norepinephrine, thrill and conflict arousal. Testosterone, dominance and aggression. Oxytocin, manipulation of attachment. Each neurochemical contributes to narcissistic reinforcement. Dopamine, as an example, rewards admiration and victory. Serotonin reinforces feelings of superiority. Endorphins help numb inner shame. It's like an anesthesia. Norepinephrine creates excitement during conflict. Testosterone increases competitiveness and reduces empathy. Oxytocin, well, that may be manipulated through love bombing and false intimacy. The narcissist is often chemically rewarded during power struggles, making surrender emotionally difficult. There's that false self that we've been talking about that comes out of all that, rewarded by never being healed, you might say. It's a process of, I need more, I'm not getting enough, I'm not healing, therefore I have to make more happen so I can heal. But it's a loop, it's a cycle that just keeps repeating. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul, as the Bible would say in Matthew 16:26? The false self is a defensive identity built to hide shame, fear, inadequacy, and emotional wounds. The narcissist projects strength externally while internally remaining emotionally fragile and disconnected. The brain rewards dominance. The soul remains empty. Narcissistic control is often self-medication for deep insecurity. Real intimacy threatens the false self. If you think about it, the closer they get to you, the more threatened they are of you. The closer they get to you, the more they hurt you. It's a cycle. Narcissists may appear powerful, but are often terrified of exposure, rejection, and vulnerability. So there's surrender versus domination. That kind of takes us to the Bible, where we have Christ-like power versus narcissistic power. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, Jesus said. There's a contrast between narcissistic power and biblical leadership, and between Christ-like humility and narcissistic power. Jesus used power to heal, restore, serve, and love, rather than dominate others. You didn't see him do that, did you? Jesus depicted surrendered pride and servant leadership. So narcissistic power seeks control. Christ-like power seeks restoration. Narcissism elevates the self. Christ elevates truth, love, and service. There's accountability, humility, spiritual transformation, renewal of the mind, surrender of the false self. It reminds me of Romans 12:2 that says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." I think when I think of that, how do we renew our minds? Well, I start every day by trying to renew my mind. You just can't do it one time. It's taken you years to think the way you think now. If you want to change any of that thinking, it's going to take years to fix what needs fixing, to rewire the brain into an automatic pattern of thinking differently in those areas that you want to improve in. That's renewing the mind. It starts in the morning. Some mornings I wake up, I feel fine. Some mornings I wake up, I don't know, it might have been a dream, but I'm thinking, I'm feeling down, or I'm feeling insecure, or I'm feeling sad, or something else. What's going on there? I need to start renewing the mind in the morning. And so right away, I turn on the music, I turn on the Christian music, I listen to a Christian verse or two. I'll usually listen to at least one chapter in the Bible right away as I'm preparing my coffee. And then maybe I might turn to grace prayer or some other morning prayer on YouTube and listen to that as I'm kind of getting my motor running a little bit. And then I start with my devotionals that I start to put out in the mornings. And before you know it, I'm feeling a whole lot better. That's renewing the mind. That's something we have to do every day and throughout the day. Because throughout the day we're thinking. Throughout the day we're readjusting to the environment that we're in. And in that adjustment, how should I see this that's going on around me? Do I let it bother me? Or do I keep the peace that I started with this morning when I was renewing my mind? I want to keep the peace, because if I keep the peace, I'm thinking clearer. If I keep the peace, I'm making better decisions. If I'm keeping the peace, I'm passing that along to those I'm talking to, or to those who are pulling out in front of me in their car, and I'm not honking my horn. I'm keeping the peace, although it doesn't always happen that way. But when it doesn't, okay, got to work on it some more. Yeah, it happens to all of us, but that's part of renewing the mind. And that's why we're often using that scripture, and there's many other scriptures along that line as well. A client shared to me that her father was very strong, very powerful person. And speaking of her father, she said, it was like he got drunk on our silence. And I had to think about that for a bit. Silence, fear, emotional submission can reinforce narcissists' sense of power, causing significant emotional damage within marriages, families, churches, leadership systems. I have clients who can't stand silence. They get anxious, they get upset. And oftentimes we trace it right back to that silence at home. That was scary because we didn't know what was going to happen because of that narcissistic parent. In identifying narcissism, we've got to ask ourselves, are they addicted to control? Do they escalate when emotionally threatened? Are they willing to surrender the false self? Can they tolerate humility and accountability? If they can't on those things, well, okay, maybe there is some narcissism there. Maybe there's some entitlement issues. Maybe they need to work on it, but you can't fix them. But you can keep the peace in you. And that's part of renewing your mind daily, that even though there's that agitation around you, that irritation around you, that stress around you, you're not letting it get to you. And all of a sudden you're able to talk to them without feeling threatened by them. All of a sudden you're able to problem solve with them whatever's going on by looking behind what they're saying into the root of, or what's fueling what they're saying. And now you're speaking to that and not those nasty words that might be coming out of their mouth, or the silence that you might be experiencing at the moment. There's a paradoxical Bible truth to all that. Truth, or true power, comes through surrender. That's paradoxical. Doesn't make sense, does it? My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness, Jesus said that. God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Paul was saying that of how he was dealing with his suffering, his pain, whatever that thorn is on the side. This statement was not spoken in a moment of triumph, strength, or visible victory. It emerged from a deeply personal struggle. Paul had pleaded with God 3 times to remove what he called the thorn in the flesh. Many have debated whether this thorn was physical illness, spiritual oppression, emotional suffering, persecution, or some persistent affliction. I recall my pastor when I was first learning the Bible, and he always thought that Paul had some virus of some sort. Well, that's possible, who knows? Yet the precise identity of the thorn is less important than God's response to it. Paul asked for removal. God offered grace. This exchange reveals a profound principle. God doesn't always remove weakness, but he transforms weakness into a vessel of divine manifestation. Theological words to say he takes that weakness and turns it into something good for you later. And oftentimes we don't see it at the moment. Only when we look back on it can we see it and become grateful for it. Narcissistic intoxication is both neurological and spiritual. While the brain may crave power, the gospel offers healing through surrender, humility, truth, and love. Narcissistic control is counterfeit strength. Christ offers authentic peace. Healing begins when power is laid down. Transformation involves both brain renewal and spiritual restoration. Transformation is change. Recognize the deep wounds beneath narcissistic behavior while maintaining accountability and truth. We have to look inside. They have to look inside. And if we can identify why we think the way we think, why we do what we do, well, all of a sudden we're maintaining accountability and truth. And we have an easier time making adjustments where we want to adjust. 2 Corinthians 12:9 dismantles the illusion that human strength is the foundation of spiritual life. Instead, it reveals a divine mystery. God's power shines most brightly where human self-sufficiency ends. Keep in mind, weakness doesn't disqualify you. Many believers assume if I struggle, God can't use me. If I feel broken, I must be spiritually failing. Yet the Bible repeatedly shows God using Moses as an example with insecurity, David with failure, Elijah with depression, Peter with impulsivity, Thomas with doubt, and Paul with affliction. God specializes in working through imperfect vessels like you and me. The world glorifies invulnerability. The kingdom glorifies surrender. Paul discovered that the thorn he wished to escape became the very instrument through which he encountered deeper grace. This verse invites every wounded, exhausted, fearful, ashamed, and struggling soul to rest in liberating truth. You don't need to be endlessly strong for God to work through you. His grace is enough. And sometimes the deepest revelation of divine power emerges not through human greatness, but through surrendered weakness before God. Well, a final thought in all that is the narcissist's power feels like glory, but it's glory stolen from God. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest, Jesus said. Well, I hope you got something out of that today. If you did, give us a like, subscribe, and sign in to our webpage, sign in to the email if you'd like to get the daily devotional that I send out every morning. I hope it's been a blessing for so many, and that it'll be a blessing for you as well. The next time we're going to talk about the false self's emotional factors of shame and guilt intolerance. Shame and guilt are central emotional constructs with profound implications. I got a feeling we all have to deal with shame and guilt at certain points, but the narcissist a lot more so, and we'll talk about that. May your troubles be minor, blessings more, and happiness come through your door. God bless. See you next time.